7. True dark Craigslist stories. I first came across Craigslist around the time of the 2001 attacks, when a ton of photos and stories were being posted there. The images and videos people were uploading were insane, but what really stuck with me were the first-hand accounts people were writing. One person described seeing a man in a business suit running past them with his tie on fire, but he didn't even seem to notice. Another person said it was like watching statues come to life as people emerged from the dust. That's when I started checking Craigslist every day, just to read the posts, the stories, and the wild things people shared. Eventually, the shock wore off, and I ran out of new things to read. So I'd start browsing the local listings in my hometown. I'd check out the free section or for sale, because you could find all kinds of weird stuff there. The fix-it and frugal posts were always interesting too, but the one section I ended up visiting every single day without fail was the temporary jobs listings. Craigslist was full of easy ways to make some quick cash. I'd get paid for participating in surveys or studies about anything from binge eating to depression. One time a beauty company even paid me to rub moisturizer on my face and tell them what I thought of it. Then there were all these small home repair gigs, simple stuff like someone needing a ladder or a hand changing the battery in a smoke alarm. I'd get $10 for a couple minutes of work, but there were some odd job postings too, and I remember one that said something like, "Earn $100 by sending a text." It sounded suspicious, so I thought it was a scam, but I decided to humor it. I emailed the address provided asking if it was legit. A response came back pretty quickly, saying it was totally real. They'd wire me money once I sent the text. Still skeptical, I asked what exactly they wanted me to say. They gave me a number and the exact words, "I see you." At that point I was freaked out, but I decided not to reply. I deleted the email thread, flagged the post, and went back to browsing. But even after all that, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Later, I noticed the post was gone, and since Craigslist had such a small moderation team back then, I'm not sure if it was flagged down or if the job was actually completed. Maybe it was just a prank, but that was nothing compared to the strange stuff I'd find in the years that followed. Between 2004 and 2009, Craigslist became even more popular, and with that came more bizarre posts, some of them jokes, others much darker. I started browsing the wilder ones just for entertainment, and soon enough, I became good at spotting the difference between people just messing around and those with real problems. But then I saw a post titled, "Earn money by helping with medical treatment," and at first nothing about it seemed off. It was just another weird ad, something you'd expect to come across on Craigslist from time to time. But my curiosity got the best of me, so I clicked on it. The listing itself was hilarious, though dark. The medical treatment in question was for the amputation of the poster's right leg. He wanted someone to come to his apartment, help him remove his leg below the knee and keep him from bleeding out. He said he'd teach the person how to tie a tourniquet and cauterize the wound, and he promised $1,000 for the help. I couldn't believe what I was reading. It was written in such a self-deprecating and self-aware way that I thought it was a joke. It almost seemed like the poster was mocking Craigslist itself. Then I saw the email address, cashtocutoffmylegatia.com. I was laughing so hard I couldn't even breathe. This had to be a joke, right? I figured I'd send an email just to let the poster know how much I appreciated the humor. A few hours later, I got a reply that made me stop laughing. Cash, who I'll call him from here on out, said he was glad I appreciated the humor, but that he was only interested in serious inquiries. He even mentioned that at the end of his post, he made it clear he wasn't joking. The more I thought about it, the more I started to wonder if this wasn't a joke. Was he really serious about amputating his leg? I wasn't sure, but I decided to humor him. I replied, saying I appreciated the dedication to the joke, but I still didn't believe him. Cash came back with a message that shook me. He said he'd been planning his amputation for years and had even practiced on one of his fingers. The idea of amputating his leg had been with him since childhood, and he didn't care if I didn't believe him. If I wasn't interested in helping, he asked me not to email him again. I couldn't let it go. I wrote back, asking if I could ask him a few questions. He said yes, and over the next week or so, I learned his story. When Cash was a kid, a popular boy from his school had been involved in a car accident, and after a long hospital stay, he lost his leg. Everyone else felt pity for him, but Cash felt something different: envy. He envied the attention the boy received, and from that moment on, he was obsessed with the idea of amputating his own leg. Cash's backstory was disturbing, but it sounded authentic. He even sent me photographic evidence of what he called his auto-amputation. He had removed part of his own finger to practice for the amputation of his leg. When I asked to see the photo of his finger, Cash was reluctant, but eventually he sent me a photo of a hand with letters written on it. Upon closer inspection, I realized the pinky finger was missing. I asked him if I could see the video of the amputation, and after some hesitation, he sent it to me. The video was exactly what I feared it would be. It was hard to watch, but I saw Cash using bolt cutters to snip through his finger. The scar was the same as in the photo. At that moment, I realized he was serious. This wasn't a joke. I still had a hard time understanding why someone would want to remove a limb, but Cash seemed to have an answer for everything. Some people wanted to look on the outside how they felt on the inside, while others wanted to be cared for like an invalid. Cash's obsession wasn't just with his own leg. He'd been involved in helping other people with their amputations, some of them by choice, others because they had no other option. One story he told me was about a man who wanted his leg amputated, but had no way to afford the procedure. Cash and the man submerged the guy's leg in ice for nearly 20 hours to kill the tissue and then drove him to the hospital for the amputation. Cash didn't take a penny for his help. He did it out of kindness. Eventually, Cash found someone willing to help him amputate his leg. I'd already tried to suggest therapy, but Cash had warned me not to. He was determined to go through with it. The last email I received from him said, "Today's the day. I'll let you know how it goes." I waited for an update, but days turned into weeks, and I never heard from him again. I sent him follow-up emails, but the replies never came. I told myself that maybe he had a change of heart, that he realized what he was doing was crazy and walked away. But deep down I knew the truth. Something had gone wrong. Maybe the tools failed him, or maybe he had gone through with it and regretted it too late. The not knowing haunted me for months, and I still haven't heard from Cash. I guess I'll never know what happened. I was in a bit of a bind at the time, emotionally speaking. Life had just thrown me one curveball after another, and I felt like I was stuck in a rut. So when a friend suggested I take a break and do something spontaneous, something totally out of my comfort zone, I figured, why not? And that's when I ended up on a weekend getaway with a group of strangers I'd met on the internet. At first I was hesitant. I didn't know any of them. They were just people I'd seen posting on a travel forum, and the whole idea of hanging out with people I'd never met felt weird. But hey, it was supposed to be a fun escape, right? So I packed my bags, hopped on a bus, and off I went. The moment I arrived at the cabin, I realized how out of place I felt. The group was super chill, all younger than me, but they had this laid-back vibe, like they were in their element. There was one guy in particular, Jake, who was more outgoing than the others. He greeted me with a smile, made me feel welcome, even though I wasn't sure I was going to fit in with their whole go-with-the-flow attitude. But I went along with it. What else was I going to do? The first night was fun. We roasted marshmallows, swapped stories, and had a few drinks around the fire pit. But the next morning, things started to feel off. I was sitting at the kitchen table nursing a hangover when Jake came in. He was acting strangely, kind of fidgety, like he was hiding something. He sat down across from me, hesitated for a moment, then just blurted it out. "I'm actually not here alone," he said. "I came with my girlfriend." That caught me off guard. "Okay, well, what's the big deal?" I asked, trying to play it cool. He leaned in a little, lowering his voice. "She's not just my girlfriend. She's married. I'm pretty sure her husband doesn't know we're here." I didn't really know how to respond to that, but before I could process it, he was off, talking to someone else, as if he hadn't just dropped a bombshell. But that nagging feeling? Yeah, it stuck with me. Later that day, things got even weirder. I was out hiking with a few of the others when we came across an old shack deep in the woods. I wasn't too keen on going inside. Something about it just didn't sit right. But Jake insisted. "It's no big deal," he said. "It's just an old hunting cabin. Let's go check it out." We all agreed, and as soon as we stepped inside, I felt a chill. It was dark, damp, and smelled like stale wood and dust. But the strangest part, there were no signs of life, no old furniture, nothing that would indicate it was ever used, except for the strange symbols carved into the walls. Jake didn't seem bothered by any of it, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Every sound, every crack of a branch seemed amplified, like something was lurking just beyond the trees. By the time we got back to the cabin, I was exhausted and on edge. But when I walked in, things had shifted. The energy was different. There was a tension in the air that hadn't been there before. Jake's girlfriend was acting strange, avoiding eye contact with everyone, and she seemed nervous. But the real kicker, she wouldn't stop looking over at Jake like she was waiting for him to do something. That's when I realized I wasn't just an outsider on this trip. I was part of something I didn't understand, something I wasn't supposed to know about. Later that night, after everyone had gone to bed, I heard a noise outside my window. It was faint at first, but then it got louder. It sounded like footsteps, but they weren't from anyone in our group. I tried to ignore it, convinced I was just imagining things, but then I saw movement in the trees. A figure. It was too dark to make out clearly, but it was there. My heart started racing. I couldn't breathe. I stayed frozen in my bed, staring at the figure in the distance, hoping it would just go away. But it didn't. It came closer. That's when I realized I had to get out of there. Something was wrong, really wrong, and I needed to leave now. I grabbed my bag, my phone, and slipped out of the cabin as quietly as I could. I don't even remember how I made it to my car, but I do remember the relief I felt when I finally started the engine and drove off. It wasn't until the next day, when I got home and tried to explain what happened, that I realized how close I'd come to a dangerous situation. It turns out Jake's girlfriend wasn't married at all. She was in hiding. And Jake wasn't just some guy I met on a travel forum. He was involved in a much bigger mess than I could have ever imagined. Turns out the whole trip was a setup to lure me in. I'm still trying to figure out how I didn't see it coming, but I guess it's true what they say. When something feels off, it usually is. I remember the first time I met him. He was charming, funny, and so easy to talk to. We hit it off immediately, and I couldn't believe how smoothly the evening was going. But then, halfway through dinner, he casually dropped a bombshell on me. "I have a girlfriend," he said. "She knows I'm here with you tonight." I didn't know how to react. I just sat there, trying to process what he'd just said, but he seemed so nonchalant about it, as if it was no big deal. I should have walked away right then, but I didn't. Instead, I sat through the rest of the date, pretending everything was fine, while my mind raced with questions. Why would he tell me this now? What kind of person would do that? The night went on, and by the time we left the restaurant, the vibe was completely off. He seemed distracted, distant, almost like he was waiting for something. It wasn't until we got in the car that he told me the rest. "She's been texting me," he said. "She saw us together. She knows I'm with you." And that's when it hit me. The date was over. I wanted to get away, but I had driven. I couldn't just leave him stranded there. I reluctantly agreed to take him back to his car, but the ride was painfully awkward. The silence was deafening, and then he started crying. Quietly at first, but then it became more intense, almost uncontrollable. He was apologizing over and over, saying how much he regretted everything. I didn't know what to say to him. I just focused on the road, trying to stay calm. But then, without warning, he reached for the car door handle. My heart stopped. Panic surged through me as I yelled at him, "We're on the highway." But he didn't seem to hear me. He was crying so hard it was like he wasn't even there. I quickly hit the child locks, trying to keep him inside, but my mind was racing. What was he going to do next? The rest of the drive felt like it took forever. I just wanted to get him back to his car and get out of there. When we finally arrived, I watched him stumble out of the car and head towards his. As soon as he was out of sight, I drove off without a second thought. I thought that was the end of it. But then, a few days later, I got a message. It was from an unknown number. I opened it and my stomach dropped. It was his girlfriend. She sent me pictures of her face, bruised and swollen with a split lip. She said he'd beaten her up after our date when she confronted him about seeing me. I felt sick to my stomach. This man, who had been so charming, so funny, had turned out to be a violent monster. I couldn't believe it. I had spent hours with him, laughing, having fun, all while being completely unaware of what he was capable of. I never saw the signs. But then his ex-girlfriend and I started talking. She told me everything he had done to her, and it was horrifying. Eventually she left him for good and we even became friends. It's strange, you know, how something so terrible can lead to something good. But that night changed me. It taught me to trust my gut, to pay attention to the red flags. If something feels off, it probably is. And looking back, I can't believe how close I came to being another one of his victims. It's a harsh reminder. Never underestimate what someone is capable of. It was late one night when I stumbled upon it. I was just browsing online, not looking for anything in particular. It wasn't the kind of thing I would usually click on, but there it was. A link posted in a random forum. Live feed, Smiling Man. Watch if you dare. The title alone gave me chills, but curiosity got the better of me. I clicked on it. The stream loaded quickly, and there he was. A man sitting in a plain wooden chair in an empty room. The lighting was harsh, almost clinical. He just sat there staring directly into the camera, unblinking, with this wide grin on his face. It wasn't an eerie smile exactly, but there was something off about it, like he was trying too hard, but failing. I kept waiting for him to do something, anything, maybe shift in his seat or make a gesture, but nothing. He just sat there, frozen in time. The only movement was the rise and fall of his chest. I checked the time. 10 minutes, then 20. Nothing. The longer I stared, the more uncomfortable I felt, as if he was daring me to keep watching. And then I heard something. At first I thought it was my imagination, but the sound grew louder. Footsteps, faint, echoing from somewhere off-screen. The man didn't move. He didn't even acknowledge the noise. I leaned closer to the screen, my pulse quickening. And then I saw it. A shadow flickered across the wall, followed by a figure entering the frame. It was a man dressed in dark clothes, wearing a ski mask and holding a sledgehammer. The intruder didn't seem to notice the live feed at first. He looked around the room, gripping the hammer tightly, and then froze when his eyes landed on the Smiling Man. The Smiling Man didn't move. His grin didn't falter. He didn't even blink. The intruder took a step closer, waved his hand in front of the man's face. Nothing. Then he whispered something, but I couldn't make it out. The Smiling Man stayed silent. Still. The intruder backed away slowly, muttering to himself, and then bolted out of the frame. I heard a door slam somewhere off-screen. For a moment, everything was silent. The man in the chair never flinched. I closed the tab, but his smiling face stayed with me long after. I never went back to that stream, but sometimes I wonder who else has found it, and what really happened to the man. When I was about 8, my dad brought home our first computer. I remember how excited he and my mum were. Dad showed me how to use MS Paint, letting me get familiar with the mouse. It was a big deal for them, a new chapter in our lives. But when we finally hooked up to the internet, that was a whole different story. Dad treated it like a gift from the gods, the key to the 21st century. But he also treated the internet like it was dangerous. He'd heard all the warnings about how the web could warp young minds. It seemed exaggerated, but over the years I began to realize that maybe there was some truth to it. Fast forward a few years, and I was finally allowed to surf the internet unsupervised, and that's when I stumbled upon Craigslist. Sure, everyone knows about the site, but I wasn't there for the sales or personals. I was diving deep into the psych and religion forums, looking for something more strange. That's where I found it. A post titled, "The Story of Anna." I thought it was just another weird online tale, but when I read it, I couldn't shake the feeling that maybe, just maybe, my uncle was right about the dark corners of the web. It was about a young man who set up a baby monitor to check on his newborn son, but one night, instead of seeing his baby, he saw a 6-year-old boy bound and gagged in a filthy cellar. The man immediately called the cops. They traced the signal to a nearby home, where they discovered 2 sisters, one of whom had recently adopted a 13-year-old girl named Anna. As it turned out, Anna wasn't the sweet, innocent girl she appeared to be. She had been manipulating the family into torturing one of the boys, and even worse, she had been slicing pieces of his flesh and feeding them to the sisters in their meals. The police were shocked when they dug deeper and realized Anna wasn't even 13. She was in her 30s, and her real name wasn't Anna. It was Barbara. After months of investigation, they finally found out who she really was. But by then, it was too late. She had already fled the country. I still think about that story about Anna or Barbara and the horrific things she convinced everyone around her to do. It's a reminder that sometimes the darkest things hide in plain sight. It was the kind of thing you hear about, but never expect to happen to you. I was heading home from a late night out, cruising down the empty road, when I saw the headlights of a car in my rearview mirror. At first, I didn't think much of it. Maybe it was just another driver on the road, or someone heading in the same direction, right? But then, it started to get strange. The car kept getting closer, almost as if it was tailing me. I told myself I was just being paranoid. After all, this is the city, and weird things happen all the time. But it wasn't just the car behind me. It was the way it seemed to follow me. Every turn I took, it took the same. Every stoplight, it stopped right behind me. I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I tried to stay calm, but I'll admit, my heart was racing. I made a few random turns, hoping to shake the car off, but no matter what I did, it stayed there. At this point, I figured it was probably someone with nothing better to do, just messing around. But then it happened. I pulled into a gas station, hoping to grab some air and maybe lose this tail. I got out of my car, went to the pump and started filling up. I didn't see the other car at first, but then out of nowhere, I heard the unmistakable sound of a door opening. I turned just in time to see a figure stepping out of the car that had been following me, a man in a hoodie, his face mostly hidden by the shadows. I froze. I didn't know what to do. I kept my hand on the gas nozzle, trying to act casual, like I hadn't noticed him. But he wasn't trying to act casual. He was walking straight toward me. No rush, no hurry, just a slow, deliberate walk. My gut twisted. I knew something was off, but I couldn't put my finger on it. When he was about 10 feet away, I finally forced myself to look at him. He stopped right there, just standing in front of me, staring me down like he was waiting for something, and then, without saying a word, he motioned to the car behind him. "It's in there," he said, his voice low and calm. "You need to see something." My first thought was to run, but my feet wouldn't move. Something was keeping me frozen in place, like my body was telling me not to trust this. But there I was, standing in front of him, trying to decide what to do. I didn't want to make a scene. Maybe it was some kind of misunderstanding. So I walked over to the car, hesitating every step of the way. When I opened the door, it wasn't what I was expecting. Inside was a box, but not just any box. It was old, weathered like it had been through a storm or two. And when I lifted the lid, I saw it, a pile of stuff, random junk that looked like it had been sitting there for years. But there was something else, something more, unsettling. Before I could react, I felt his presence behind me. He was right there, close enough that I could feel his breath. That's when I heard the click, a cold metallic sound that sent a chill straight through me. He had a gun pointed right at my back. "Give me the keys," he said, calm as can be, like this was just a routine thing for him. The tone in his voice didn't waver, but I could feel the tension building, like something was about to break. I didn't know what to do. Panic was setting in fast, but I kept my cool, forced myself to act like I wasn't terrified. Slowly, I handed over the keys, my hands shaking so bad I could barely grip them. As I did, I noticed something else. In the driver's seat of the car, there was someone else, someone I hadn't noticed before, crouching low, watching everything unfold. My heart skipped a beat. This wasn't just some robbery. It was a setup. And if I didn't act fast, things were about to get a lot worse. In that instant, everything clicked. I tossed the keys toward the car, hoping that would satisfy them, but I wasn't sticking around to find out. Without thinking, I turned and sprinted for my car. I heard him shout something behind me, but I didn't stop. My door was locked. I fumbled with the handle, panic rising in my chest. Finally, I got in, slammed the door shut, and threw the car into gear. Tires screeched as I peeled out of the gas station, not looking back. I don't know how I made it home. I don't know how I managed to keep it together long enough to get out of there alive. But when I finally did, I locked the doors, sat in the dark, and tried to shake off the feeling that I had narrowly avoided something much worse. A close call. A near miss. But sometimes, a close call is all it takes.